All right, hello. This is going to be a tutorial on basically how to connect the RVRs to a MATLAB GUI app and basically how to go about debugging and building basically a couple of components uh, for your project. All right, so the first thing you're going to want to do is go to Apps and App Designer. You can kind of see in the background here, I already have my RVR connected. So just make sure that uh, is true. You don't really need to have an RVR connected to kind of start building the app, but it's definitely recommended if you're connecting it to kind of debug it as you're building. All right, so this is going to be kind of like the screen, the starting page for your app. You can kind of see there are some components in what's called the component library here. You can see buttons, axes, checkboxes, sliders, maybe some more interesting ones like gauges, switches, um, indicators, heading indicator, things like that. And you also have a component browser here, which is all your components. Now, in the very beginning, you're only going to have the figure as a component. And I could actually just run this. Let's call it Robo app. All right, and running it, you can see it's just a blank figure. There's nothing to kind of really do here. And if I go to code view, you'll see that there's already, let's go ahead and expand some of these fields here by hitting the plus button. You can see there's already kind of code written that MATLAB has made in the background here, and it is not really able to be changed. You can see I'm kind of typing here. There's no way I can actually physically change this code. And MATLAB does that for a reason. It's so that you don't kind of change the bare bones of how this operates and like actually displays. Um, so it's kind of writing the code in the background that it needs to actually display the app. But we will change code later, just not this code. Now I want to talk about two things here. You'll see that there are kind of two different sets of things in this kind of app. There are what's called properties, and there are what's called methods. So methods are basically functions. They're where you store all your functions. You kind of see there's a distinction between, different properties and different methods in their access, private, public. Don't really worry about that. That's more so for security and whether you want that function to be accessible, outside the actual app. Yeah, don't worry too much about that. But basically, yeah, methods are functions and properties are variables. And so you can kind of see there's already a variable called UI figure. That's this figure. And there's already methods like creating the actual app. And I guess when you close the app, there's the delete. And those are basically the things that are to start off. So what do we need to do to actually start working with this and connect it to the robot? So we need to add a property first. We need to add a variable called RVR so that we can kind of pass it around the rest of the app. So first of all, I'm going to do app input argument and do RVR. That'll make a startup function where we can just simply put RVR into app like this. So we just take RVR and put it into app. Now this changes the app from being a 0 input argument to a 1 input argument. We have to have RVR here, which is why I've went ahead and already have it in my workspace. And then the next thing you need to do is actually add that as a property. So I'm just going to go ahead and do a public or public property. I'm just going to set that to RVR. So now that I've done that, if I actually erase this, you'll see that if I do app dot, you'll see that there's now a field here called RVR. If I said that was 2 and I went down here and I looked into these, you see how it's updating RVR2. And so the only things you can actually store in app are things that you've declared as a property up here. So that's why we declared RVR as a property. We can go ahead and say my robot heart. All right, let's do app dot RVR. All right, so this is all set. So we can have RVR as an input, and the rest of the app can use it. So how do we actually go about building something cool, right? That's all the startup stuff. How do we do something cool, Matthew? I'm sure you're asking. 5 minutes into the video. Let us do something simple. Let us make a gauge. And let's say this is a acceleration gauge. So I could say acceleration. I'm pretty sure that's how you spell it. And it's gonna kind of move this, right? So one thing you can always do is you can click this and you can look at the different types of things that can be changed, right? Most of the important ones are probably going to be in this first section. So there are limits and there are values. So for acceleration, probably you want something like 2 because it's not going to be very high. So you can see that when I clicked 0 to 2 here, it immediately changed how that gauge looks from 0 to 2. And this value is kind of how you control where that needle points. So I could do 1.2 here, hit enter, it's going to point to 1.2. Hit back to 0, oops, 0, it's going to go back to 0. You can actually do values outside, it'll just put it on the maximum here, right? So you can go ahead and do 0 again. So how do we actually connect that to the robot so that it tracks the robot's acceleration, right? Let's say this is X acceleration, right? All right, so how we go about doing that is through a system of callbacks. The only problem is that a gauge does not have a callback. There's no real way to interact with a gauge as a user interface. So how do we go about kind of changing that? Let's do a rocker switch kind of sounds cool. So you kind of have to choose a component that kind of has an on and off state, such as a switch, rocker, toggle switch. I think a state button would work. A couple of other things. I guess you could do a slider that after a certain point turns it on, but that'd be kind of ridiculous. You could do a checkbox, certainly. So yeah. And all of these kind of have callbacks associated with them. So we can go ahead and put a callback. So if we click this, we'll see that the callbacks associated with a rocker type switch is value change function. Let's go ahead and change that switch to acceleration gauge. Sure, let people know that's connected to this. And we can hit the drop down menu here and just hit this. That will take us back to the code view. And sometimes when you do that, this little value, MATLAB will already kind of pre-write for you. That's going to be the value that this is at. You might be thinking, well, what is that value? Like, it's an on and off. Does that mean it's a true or false? Like, what is it? And I don't know. I have to actually go and look. If we click, so if you're just at the normal UI, if you click this, you'll see that it currently has a value of off, and it can be, its items are either off or on, right? You could change these to be something like true or false, whatever. I'm just going to keep it on and off, and it has a value of off right now. You could change that to on, and it would flip to on. And so that's kind of how you want to go about doing it. So right here, this value, we can actually just debug it right here. Go ahead and save. Sorry about that. And we can go ahead and remember that we have an input to this now, so we can't just hit run. It won't work. But what we can do is either type in RVR here, and you'll see that the run now has these little like blue dots, and it will run, actually running that with RVR as an input. Another thing you can do is you can always just go back and do, what is this called? Robo app with an input of RVR. And that'll work the exact same way. It'll bring it up here. So yeah, either way you want to do it is completely fine. I kind of like just to do this method because it's a little bit easier. It's already on the same, page. So yeah, let's go ahead and hit run again. And since I have a debug point here, when the value of that gauge is switch is changed, it should debug automatically when I go into here. So yep, it went ahead, and you'll see that the value of the app gauge switch is now on. And if I were to hit step, that kind of inputs, that value into here, into just a variable called value, and that is on. So how do you actually go about setting up acceleration, right? So you can actually do an if statement, right? Let's do if value, right? You could do value. If you didn't have this line, you could just do app dot, gauge value here. But since MATLAB went ahead and put this nice little convenient line here, we can just do value. And let's say that's equals to, I kind of forget sometimes how to do this correctly. But the nice thing about this is since we're debugged, we can go into here. We can say value that has a value of on. Okay, so if I were to do value equals on, would that work? And no. It kind of works. It outputs a logical array. We don't actually want a logical array. We just want a single logical value, which I think can probably be done if we just do this. Yes. So this is one of those times in MATLAB where you actually do need the double parentheses to get a single logical scalar. Yeah, so you can kind of always, debug, go back to the MATLAB main window and kind of like go through here. You can always explore like what is in app here. You can hit tab. You can, for instance, I guess switch, right? That's the switch that we have. We can look and see what things it has in it, like value on, right? There's other things like, I guess, font size or font size. You can see, you could actually change that. You could set that equal, right, like to 20. And if we kind of look at our app, that's what it looks like. If I set that to 20, you would see that now it's bigger text, right? So you can kind of just explore it that way. Another way that you can kind of do all of that is while I'm in debug mode. So I guess I'll go ahead and finish that this statement and continue on with that. But if value is equal to, and remember we have to do the double parentheses on. Let's say that we want to set, let's see, we got to do app.rvr.get acceleration. Let's say dot x, right? To get the x component out. We're going to set that equal to what? App dot. All right, so I kind of have to look here. And let's just stop debugging and let me finish my earlier point. You could always like click this and kind of like look and see font size. You could change that to 20 or 18, I guess, like whatever you wanted to do, right? So this is kind of like showing you the different things inside that sorry about that. Basically different things inside the object. So how we would actually, get the value here is app dot, acceleration gauge switch dot value. We wanted the name of the font, app dot acceleration gauge switch dot font name. And that's the same with every component, right? So it has all of these kind of things, and we can either change it through here, through this kind of GUI, or we could change it, in the actual code by doing app dot component name dot whatever the value thing you want to change is, right? All right, so let's go ahead and change this. Let's do app. Yeah, that's what I was looking for. So what is this? This is called acceleration X gauge, and the thing I want to change is value, right? So that means I want to do app dot acceleration gauge switch dot value is equal to. And just setting it equal to is enough to change it. So we could do end here. And I think that's it. Yeah, so go ahead, turn off debug, go ahead and run that bad boy. Let's see what happens. So the nice thing about acceleration is that it's kind of independent of actually what your drive speed is. So I could actually kind of just shake the robot a little bit, and you'll see that the, oops, all right, got something wrong here. Let's see, value must be an element defined in the items properties. What you talking? Oh, sorry, this is the switch. That is not actually what we want. We want the acceleration X gauge. Sorry about that. I'm pretty sure I said it and then I just typed the wrong thing. All right, there we go. Acceleration gauge now, not the switch, the actual gauge itself. All right, let's go ahead and run that one more time. All right, if I hit, kind of shake it a little bit and then hit on, and then repeatedly turn it on. I need to shake it. I can kind of see the gauge value changing a little bit. Maybe I need to like readjust this axis. But it was essentially working. But it was only working once, like one time when I turned it on, right? Let's say you wanted to do that, but made it so it's constantly tracking, right? Simple fix, you just change this to a while loop, right? So this will constantly do this until the value of this is not on, right? So something other than on, like off. And once that, so let's go ahead and copy this, and let's say that once it's off, right, we just reset it back to 0. That way people can see that it's not actually on or something, right? And that should be the only change. So let's go ahead and hit run, and let me hit on. And so now I can kind of shake it a little bit. You'll see that the value is kind of real time now. So yeah. What do I want to do now? All right, let's say you wanted to take a picture, right? Let's go ahead and throw in a plot, and let's go ahead and throw in a button. All right, so that adds two things. It adds a UI axis and a button. Let me just go ahead and rename that button take pic. All right, and you kind of see it automatically kind of updates the name so that it's a little bit better organization, I would suppose you could say. App.takePicture button, right? So that way we can kind of find it easier if we have like 20 buttons. They're not just all named button 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so on. As well as this, let's say robot POV, right? That actually does not change this text, but that's okay. We'll just remember that this is UI axes. All right, so if I wanted to make that take a picture, we have to go to click the button, go to callbacks. We want to add a callback if the button is pushed, right? All right, so if the button is pushed, there's no real value associated with this, right? Because it's a function that's run if the button is pushed, right? The button doesn't have a value. It's just runs if it's pushed, right? Does that make sense? Whereas like something like a state button that like once you push it, it kind of stays pushed. That would have a value, right? Of pushed or not pushed. But a normal button kind of just has a value that, or a callback that sees if it's pushed. So let's go ahead and let's say we set this up to take a picture. app.rvr.getImage. Let's save that as an image, right? Yeah. All right, so we have that as an image, and then we want to connect it to that axes. We could do IMShow. We need to do app.UI axes here. I can't remember if it has another input. Let's just go ahead and say image. And we can always test and see if that works. We can hit run. Take picture. It did not. So I think it has to be named like parent or something. All right, I think that should work. Yeah, let me make sure camera is pointed at me. Let's go ahead and hit run again. I'll go ahead and kind of hold my hand while I click the button. And it did not work again. Let's see, app.UI axes. That makes sense. I'm getting the parent of UI axes and displaying image on it. All right, I think I've forgotten something. So let's just do image, add image to MATLAB GUI. All right, let's see. None of these are really what I'm wanting. Again, not really. Add image to, let's say, axes MATLAB app. Should probably look this up before. I thought that was how you do it. Let's see. Man, got the syntax just slightly wrong. All right, let's run back. Okay, it should be image first, then parent, I guess lowercase or uppercase, whatever. And then app.UI axes. Oh man, that makes me frustrated, but it's okay. All right, so let's go ahead and run it again. All right. All right, you can kind of see me there. Have my hand up. Have the robot on the table next to me. So that works. All right. So I guess just use this kind of syntax where it's IMShow and then image. I guess you have to have the parent kind of input and then saying you want to display it on UI axes. All right, so let's see, one last thing. Let's say, I guess let's just do a slider button that kind of set speed. Let's just change this to speed. Oops, speed. All right. Add a callback here for button is pushed. All right, if speed button is pushed, let's get the speed value out of app dot. Let's see, what is the slider called? Speed slider dot value. All right, and I'm actually going to want to round that because, well, basically you probably haven't noticed this before, but let's say we did RVR dot set drive speed, let's say 60, and let me hold up my robot. Make sure you're holding your robot if you're doing this. And you can kind of hear it, it kind of goes, set it back to 0. If I did 60.1, nothing, right? And that's because we have to set these to integer values. Can't be a floating point or non-integer. So I'm just going to go ahead and do round here. That way it is always rounded speed. And then I can do app dot RVR dot set drive speed. Speed. All right, that should work, I think. We can go ahead and run. Go ahead and hold your robot up or make sure it's on the floor when you do this. Let's go ahead and hit the 60 set speed. Let's go ahead and test 100. It's going faster now. Let's hit 0. All right, perfect. Okay, so that's how you set the speed. You can do that with any number of values you want to set, things like that. Let's do one more where we are setting a random function to go. So let's say this is test function, right? So you're later in the project, right? You're wanting to execute, or a button to execute like one of your teammates' commands, right? Let's go back to normal MATLAB, make a real quick function here. New script. Let's call it function test function, test func, sure. It has a value of speed. Oh, sorry. First of all, it has RVR as an input and speed value. Let's go ahead and hit end. Let's say all this function does is it sets the drive speed to speed, kind of similar to the value slider thing we just did. And you know what? Let's say it has an output. Let's say get kind of nonsensical, but let's just say you, for some reason, got the distance as an output, right? As your teammates function, right? So real simple function, let's just add dis here as an output. All right, and save it. All right, so all this does is set the drive speed and give you back the distance out. Let's go ahead here, let's add a callback, add button push callback. Right, you kind of see all of our button push callbacks are kind of placed kind of near each other. What do we want to do here? We want to do dis is equal to test code. What did we actually call it? Test func. All right, test func. We need app.rvr, right? Because we want to feed it in the RVR variable, and that variable is stored in app.rvr. Then comma, let's do 70. So it just always goes at 70 speed, I guess. Actually, let's leave that unsuppressed, and we'll be able to see from the MATLAB output here whether or not distance was actually calculated, or I guess not calculated, but output as a sensor. So let's go ahead and hit run, and let's just push that button. All right, and you can kind of see, or should probably hear that the robot actually did move, and you can see right here it did output distance. And so you could, theoretically, I guess, if you needed that variable, you could go up here, add my distance, right? Now that that's a variable in here, you could do my or app dot my distance is equal to distance. And now that would be something that you could use anywhere. Like you could have it, affect other functions and things. So that's kind of how you do a basic setup of an app, how you kind of get things running, how you can kind of debug things to kind of see, um, right? So like I could always debug here. I could always hit run. Is it still debugged? No. Let's make sure that that is red, and then we can go ahead and hit the button again. It's going to go ahead and run. I can go ahead and look and see what that value of distance is here. I could always go out here. Go ahead. Oops. Oh. App dot. Yeah. So when you're debugged, right? Again, remember that your workspace isn't going to be your workspace that you have from like normal. It's going to be the workspace that you have inside exactly here. So the only things you have here are app and event, right? And I guess the distance that we just output, which is why in our workspace we only have app, event, and distance. So if you want to work with the robot, you have to do app.rvr, whatever. All right, yeah, so I think that's about it for me. Hopefully this was a little bit enlightening on how to actually make an app. And yeah, if you ever need any help, you should ask one of the TAs, and we'll be here to help. So thank you. All right, so just a quick add-on to this tutorial. One thing I did notice while watching it back is that I did something that's uh, kind of you want to avoid. So in this get acceleration while loop, you want to add a pause. That way, because if you have like multiple switches or gauges all acting at the same time, this will definitely slow down and cause you to get like weird results. So you don't want to update that too frequently. So let's just do pause of 0.1. And that should, still be relatively, real time, right? Every, 10 updates a second, right? Probably more than really you want, but uh, definitely add those pauses and while loops that you expect to run like, possibly for a long time. And yeah, probably also want to, uh, no, I think that's fine. Yeah. Yep. So just make sure, again, in while loops, you expect to run for long times when they're switched on. Just add those pauses. All right. Thank you.